Okay, I think we can start. So, hi everyone, and welcome to KELA's Cybercrime Ecosystem Masterclass. I'm Ariane Bleiweiss, Marketing Manager at KELA. It's a pleasure to have you all with us today. I sincerely believe you'll gain valuable knowledge and new skills from this session. And now, without any more delay, let's give a warm welcome to our awesome VP of Product, Raveed Laeb. Raveed, take it away.
Hi, thank you, Ariane. Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for joining. My name is Raveed. I lead the product here in KELA. I won't take too much time of the webinar talking about myself. So very quickly, again, lead product in KELA. My background is in military intelligence and in CTI specifically for the past 8 years or so. Today, what I want to do is to talk a tiny bit about, in the kind of 30 minutes we have, about what the cybercrime underground ecosystem is, basically what's commonly referred to by a lot of vendors or the media as the dark web. So we'll try to give the KELA take on how we view the cybercrime underground, why is it interesting, and probably, like most importantly, what can defenders do with solutions and services and products that give them visibility and access to data or intelligence coming from these areas of the internet? So diving up into kind of the bottom lines up front, and for those of you who will drop in 10 minutes, the key things that I think are worth taking away home. So first of all, as most of you or a lot of you probably know, cybercrime is a business, and we'll explain specifically why, but generally speaking, cybercrime is a business. Bad people do bad things on the internet, not just, or even mostly not, for the sake of doing bad stuff, but to make money. And not only that's a business, as probably most of you know as well, it's a business that pays well, or specifically has been paying well for quite some time now. And what that actually means is that cyber criminals become even less free-forming chaos agents on the internet and become more entrepreneurs, business owners, and also employ tactics and practices that are used in real actual business, like legitimate business in the real world. On top of that, some of the things that you'll probably hear today or know about the cybercrime underground from past experiences, these may show or may hint that attackers have an edge because they have, as we'll see very soon, a lot of data that they can share, because they have shops and markets in which they can monetize or gain access to very relevant, interesting data. However, our thesis here will be is that knowing what the adversaries know about you and exploiting their edge, you can kind of reverse the scale and basically use that leverage, use that visibility to defend yourself in a way that's more effective. So again, if we end here, these are the things that are worth taking home. So let's talk about a tiny bit about why cybercrime is a business, or like what's the narrative that we frame cybercrime as a business in. And in order to understand that, we should probably take a step back and talk about the general buckets for attacker motivations in doing bad stuff on the internet. And generally speaking, in the industry, we kind of refer to potential motivations in 3 different buckets. The first one is the ideological bucket. So what's commonly referred to, generally speaking, as hacktivism, what we see a lot coming from Russia in the past year, and what was also very well known in the media and generally speaking in the community like 10 years ago with Anonymous and stuff like that. So people doing bad stuff on the internet due to ideology or due to beliefs that things should not be the way they are. The second motivation is financial. People doing bad stuff on the internet in order to make money. And the third motivation is strategic, and that usually refers to, generally speaking, again, nation states. So intelligence apparatus of different nation states in the world, and really state-sponsored or state-affiliated actors that do stuff not for immediate gain, specifically not monetary gain as well, but kind of for long-term gain. So espionage, intellectual property theft, and so on. And these different motivations in different times get kind of different weights or different emphasis in media, in reporting by vendors such as KELA. And what we have seen over the years is that that can create a confusion, or at least in some sort, because that begs the question, what should I as a defender, what should I as an intelligence practitioner, what should I care about? So how do I model my threats against what? Against hacktivists, against financially driven cyber criminals, or against nation states? And what we would say, and kind of the thesis of the next 25 minutes would be that financially driven cybercrime, of course, it's not the only threat out there, but it probably is the threat that is most interesting to talk about, and we'll explain exactly why. Now, to begin with, a lot of reporting and again, a lot of talk in the community and in the industry tends to refer to nation state attacks, or generally speaking, APTs. And that makes sense. These are the threats that are the most sophisticated, or at least tend to be. They're the most sexy. When they hit you, they could probably hit pretty hard. However, data from the last few years and also from before kind of consistently shows that financially driven cybercrime or a financially driven attack are probably the majority of things that we're seeing. So we have here two different experts, one from the DBIR in 2020 and one from the DBIR, or the Verizon Data Breach Incident Report, posted just like 2 weeks ago in early June. And both of them, as well as reports that were posted between these two intervals, very specifically show that financially driven cybercrime or financially driven network intrusions or just financially driven breaches are kind of the majority of things that organizations are seeing. And that's a very interesting point, because again, sometimes there tends to be kind of discrepancy or disparity between sexiness and reporting and the actual threats that organizations may be facing. So kind of to the point of having a business and making that business pay, we see a lot of the actual kind of strategic data supporting that claim. And if we're talking about a financially driven breach or financially driven cybercrime, we can't talk about making money without talking about monetization. So how do attackers actually take the things that they get, or how do they take their tradecraft and make it into cash at hand, like at the end of the day? Because when we think about a business, there needs to be an ROI, there needs to be a return on investment. And that can kind of lead us to a point where we can look, when we're talking about financially driven cybercrime, we can talk about monetization as kind of the 8th phase to the cyber kill chain, because really there's no bother spending a lot of time and a lot of money in performing reconnaissance and delivering a payload and exfiltrating data, unless you have a way as an attacker to take that data or to take the things that you have gained during the attack and make them into actual money that you can use, be it to pay for food or to buy a Lamborghini, as a lot of ransomware affiliates tend to do lately. And in order to talk about monetization and talk about how do different attackers make money, and kind of take a step aside from the cyber kill chain and talk about a more abstract model, we can refer to these 4 phases or 4 stages as kind of a very generic business plan or business model for cybercrime. And any attack, any bad thing that you will see someone is doing on the internet for the sake of monetary gain would be, like, without any exception, comprised of these 4 very abstract, very general steps. The first one would be coding, so creating kind of the technical payload that you'd like someone to receive. The second would be delivering it. The third would be making it do what it's supposed to do when it reaches its target. And the last would be monetizing it and finding a way to make money out of it. And probably what most of you, if not all of you, have in mind when we're talking about financially driven cybercrime, and I'm surprised that it's been almost 10 minutes and I haven't mentioned that word yet, is ransomware. Ransomware is so widespread, and we talk about it as an industry so much for the past few years, not just because it's sexy, not just because it's a headache for organizations, but mostly because it's really good business. It's a very effective way for cyber criminals to create different specializations in the process, as we'll talk about in a second, and also have kind of a guarantee that you would get your money, that you would make something at the end of the day and take some money home. And when we talk about ransomware with this abstract process, I think it makes things very clear. So if you want to infect an organization with ransomware, you first of all need a good ransomware. So you need a good payload that can encrypt a lot of hard drives in a way that's efficient, in a way that cannot be decrypted very easily, in a way that cannot be stopped on the fly by defense mechanisms. You need that payload. You need to take it and deliver it to the actual organization that you want to attack. You then need to orchestrate all of the encryption of all of the workstations at the same time. And you then need to negotiate with the actual organization that you've breached in order to maximize your profit at the end of the day. And those of you who have worked with engineers and who have worked with attackers or red teamers, and those of you who have worked with people who do negotiations or do sales, probably know that these 4 different phases take very, very different skill sets. So the people who would be very good at creating a sophisticated, efficient crypto locker would not be, generally speaking, very good at negotiating with victims, like in a way that makes sense, because these tend to be at very separate skill sets. And when we talk about cybercrime mimicking normal, legitimate, real-life business, that is exactly that. We see specialization happening. And that's like a tiny picture of Adam Smith for all of you who are interested in economy, because that is what we see in actual business. We see companies bringing on different types of engineers. We see like small startups that grow. Everyone does sales at the beginning, but then only dedicated professional people, salespeople start to do sales. And the exact same thing is happening with cybercrime, because this is what enables business at scale. And our thesis here would be that in order to leverage the data and the intelligence that you can get from the cybercrime underground, or really just in order to protect yourself in a way that's more efficient and be able to create threat models that kind of show you the same thing that you would like to see in real life, you need to understand how the cybercrime business works, so you can kind of take the point of view of an actual attacker. And a lot of organizations, when they try to model threats or try to think about why, how, and for what means will they be attacked, they kind of tend to think in questions of why am I interesting? Why am I worth it? We've seen a lot of organizations that think that, oh yeah, my data is not very interesting, I probably will not be targeted, because they tend to think of an attack as like one thing that happens. It has a start, it has an end, and one attacker does everything in the middle, because that's what we've been conditioned to think with things like the cyber kill chain. And also it's more intuitive, it kind of makes sense. And that kind of mimics or kind of hints at the idea of an attacker looking at a company or searching out a company, looking at a business entity like a big bank, and says, oh, here's an interesting business entity, let's hack it. Where in reality, if you're thinking about it as a business, that's not what really happens. Attackers, when they look at organizations, they don't look at the business entity. They look at the different parts of the organization, different parts of the business, different parts of the network infrastructure, different parts of the human assets that the organization has that can be monetized. So the business entity is not interesting, really. What's interesting are the different things in it that are worth money in the market. So in that sense, we could have an organization spreading it out to different parts, like credentials that it has, servers that it hosts, certificates that it uses to sign code, databases in which it saves PII about its customers, and probably a lot of other different things. And we'll be able to see different attackers that specialize, again, going back to making money and monetization, they specialize in monetizing that specific kind of asset. So one attacker could be interesting in credentials to remote desktop servers, so they can monetize them on dedicated markets. A different attacker might be interested in stealing certificates, so they can sign malware and then sell that as a service or sell the actual certificate. And a different attacker might be interested in databases that can be monetized and sold for sending spam. And understanding that attackers don't necessarily see the organization as this one singular thing, but as different parts that can be monetized, is important to understanding the business of cybercrime and how things, services, goods, and products are actually monetized by attackers in the cybercrime underground. So in order to look in depth into some of these monetization methods, let's take a hypothetical scenario. We have an attacker that infected 100,000 machines, so actual, let's say, laptops around the world with malware. This malware can be an info stealer, stealing specifically credentials. It can be a remote access Trojan. Let's go with the flow and just talk about a generic malware. Now, this malware can bring the attacker a lot of different things. It can harvest potentially PII. It can gain access to compromised websites that the user of the machine has access to, for example, WordPress credentials or any other CMS or anything of that nature. Through the access, we can also get credentials. We can get access to traffic emanating out from the machine. We can get access to a network if we're talking about a sysadmin infected with a rat, and a bunch more stuff. So even a malware infection is not just one thing. It can give attackers a lot of different stuff that they then need to monetize. So these things, the stuff that attackers get when they infect a machine in this particular example, they should be worth money to someone else out there, or the attacker should have a business model to how they can be monetized, because those of you who work in a business, which probably are like the most of you, know that you need to sell something in order to make money. Again, this is all an economy that we're looking at. So if we're talking about stolen PII, one way to monetize it would be to perform identity theft with it. If we're talking about network access, so again, like access to an actual network that the attacker has gotten, one way to make money out of that would be to sell it to ransomware operators or affiliates and so on. And these would be ways for the attacker to make money. And there exists like many different monetization methods. These are all just examples to try and make the discussion a bit more tangible. And in order to make it even more tangible, let's deep dive into two examples, the credentials example and the network access example. And also, as we'll see, they're like very, very interconnected and intertwined. So let's talk about stolen credentials. Again, we have the example that we've seen before, where we'll now put the hat of an attacker that has access or has compromised 100,000 machines around the world. So I've already delivered, in my case, again, as an attacker, I have already delivered the payload and have run it of like an info stealing malware across 100,000 different machines. And from each machine, again, let's go with nice clean numbers. From each machine, I was able to harvest 10 different credentials. And the credentials, the way I get them would be, just for the sake of discussion, like so, in a file that contains the URL for which credentials were stolen. So what do I type in my browser to use the credentials, the username, the password, and that's basically it. Now, I have probably spent some money, time, and effort in delivering the payload, and now my turn comes to actually make money. And one way to do that, kind of in the old world, would be I can go on the Cybercrime forum and like sell some of the credentials that I have found. So what we have here is an actual case of an actor like from 5 years ago that goes on the Cybercrime forum to sell specific credentials. Now, what we can understand is the million credentials that the attacker has gotten. So again, 100,000 infected machines, 10 credentials per machine, just for a very easy case. Now the attacker has to go through all of these credentials, understand which one pertain or relate to, for example, banking in Canada, because the attacker assumes that someone out there in the market is willing to pay money for credentials that pertain to Canadian banks. Now, even though that sounds trivial, you can probably understand or sense that there's a business model here. The attacker doesn't just go and say, oh, I have a bunch of credentials, who wants to buy them? Because that would not be very appealing. They go and filter the credentials that they've gotten to try and pick out or weed out the ones that would be interesting. Now, this isn't a technical problem. Technically, doing that is very easy. And there are a lot of actually automated solutions for cyber criminals that do that for them. What we see here is a business problem. It's a business problem due to a few different things in it. A, the model here is very reactive. So the person goes in a forum, posts a message, has to wait for someone to reach out. B, it's not very scalable. in the example that we see here, the attacker waits for someone to reach them via ICQ and buy the credentials from them. And C, probably the most important, the attacker might be missing out on interesting, relevant, critical credentials that someone is willing to buy for loads of money, but this particular attacker, in this sense, this Zolok person, doesn't know that they're worth money. So unknown unknowns. And this is a very major issue for attackers. And we're not just saying that because we've fever dreamed it. We're saying it because we can actually see that being remarked by threat actors like in real life. So what we see here is a forum post by an actual actor that specializes in selling credentials. And for a very long while, this particular attacker, aggressor, their business model was to sell the credentials, just like the person we've seen before. Go ahead in the forum, post that they want to sell banking credentials, and basically wait for people to buy them. And after a while, the actor has seen a lot of different potential buyers reaching out to them and asking, oh, hi, do you have credentials to this particular URL or this particular service? And as he says here, and this is Google Translate English, so aggressor doesn't have neither time nor desire, I love the phrasing, to go back to their databases and to all of the credentials that they have and search for everything that their attackers offer. So basically, again, talking about the business problem and the business solution, what happened here, and we've seen that kind of advance over time, is that attackers come up with different ways to monetize the credentials. Instead of wading through them and posting them for sale or posting an advert about selling them in forums, what we have seen is many attackers going to selling products or selling services rather than products, not just selling the credentials, but selling a subscription or a service that allows other attackers to very easily buy credentials from them, either in bulk or one by one. And one very good example to that is Genesis. I assume by now that most of you, again, have heard about Genesis. For those of you who haven't, Genesis is an online cybercrime shop in which attackers monetize credentials. And actually, again, going back to mimicking real life business, what we see here is cyber criminals mimicking Netflix, for example. So Netflix went from sending videos in the mail to offering a software as a service, offering a SaaS solution that allows subscriptions and buying only what you want to see. And that is exactly what cyber criminals have done in this example with selling credentials. So again, mimicking actual businesses. And going back to the example of specific skill sets that are needed that I mentioned before, you can probably assume that infecting machines with info stealers and creating a sleek, nice UI that your buyers can use to buy the credentials are very different skill sets. So just another example to the cybercrime underground ecosystem, not just pertaining to how do I attack people, but also providing user experience and graphic design and copywriting and a lot of other stuff that's needed to actually do business in crime. Now, if we take all of that flow and show it kind of in one felling swoop, what we can see is that we have an attacker that has access to a lot of credentials. What they then do is they create a store through which their buyers can buy these credentials. They go on forums in the cybercrime underground and post an advert about now having this shop and now offering access to it. Then a buyer, so one person, a different person, sees the advert, logs into the market, searches for stuff that they need because they have a business model that allows them to monetize that. In this example, they choose, for example, Citrix access to an organization, so a VPN access that can be leveraged to provide a wider network access. Then the buyer does some more work on their side, expand the access, and then they also go on the forum and sell that access for even more, for a lot more than they paid. So this is how they make money. They go in the market, buy access, and then sell it for thousands of dollars. And what we see here is basically three different parties all make money, like in this chain of value. The forum makes money because people pay for adverts. The market itself, Genesis in that case, makes money because people go in and buy credentials, and the buyer makes money because they can take these credentials, transform them into a different product, and then sell it. Now, This is also not the full chain of value, right? Because the malware that was spread and a lot of workstations were infected with it, someone coded it. And the network access that we see here offered for sale for $3,000, someone will buy it and then will have to find a way to monetize that as well. So even that example, it does not exist in a vacuum. It's also a part of a wider ecosystem that really doesn't ever end when you really go down the rabbit hole of how cybercrime actually works. To kind of summarize everything or really showcase how we connect, for example, to ransomware, which is the thing everyone talks about, let's pick up where we left before, network access. So what we see here is, just like we've seen before, a few different examples of cyber criminals selling network access or selling access to organizations. And this is something that we've been tracking for a very long while, and we see that happening a lot. Anywhere from people just going and posting the actual compromised domain and to people kind of hinting about the organizations that they've attacked. In this example, an Australia-based organization with $20 billion in revenue. So again, behind that, there's a lot of work of how the access is obtained, how it's leveraged, and so on. And then these people go on forums and offer these accesses for sale. On the other hand, on the code side of the chain of value, we have a different actor that is very good at creating ransomware. And in this case, we have an actor that created a very good ransomware and is now looking for people who would be able to monetize their ransomware by bringing in network access. So he's explicitly looking for corporations with people that have RDP, VNC, or SSH access. You take these two different parts of the ecosystem, people who specialize in network access and people who specialize with ransomware, you combine them like with someone with an entrepreneurial mindset, and you get ransomware. You get actual organizations being compromised and ransomware operators at the end making money by extortion. And really just another example of how kind of different things combine together to create the cybercrime chain of value. And also, coming back again to our friend Adam Smith, create a division of labor, creating different people along the line that make money from doing very different things, and creating a situation in which a cyber attack, in this sense, a ransomware attack, is not one big monolith of one attacker doing something bad, rather than a few different like parts in which different attackers do different work, or again, divide the labor between themselves. So I'm right down to the last minute, so I'll skip on talking about some initial access brokers some more, and I'll just really breeze through a few examples that showcase that the cybercrime underground is not just that. It's not just ransomware. It's not just credentials. It's a bunch of stuff, from markets selling access to compromised accounts, to compromised websites that can be used to spread malware or misinformation or SEO poisoning, through markets that sell access to compromised servers, so RDP and SSH servers, and down to markets or shops selling access to compromised business emails, which can then be used for business email compromise, phishing, social engineering, and so on. Now, two takeaways that kind of correlate to the bottom lines up front that I've mentioned before. The first one, everything that we've mentioned or that I've mentioned, credentials, what attackers do, visibility into how they work, this is all attack surface. When we talk about attack surface, like as an industry, we shouldn't just talk about the vulnerabilities that you might be exposing to the internet, your network footprint, the things that are more technical. We should really talk about what an attacker knows about you as a potential victim, because anything that you show to the internet or anything that an attacker can learn about you potentially can be monetized. Attackers are opportunistic. They'll take whatever they can if they can make money out of it. So that really comes down to changing the way we think about attack surface a tiny bit and making it not just technical, but more holistic. Secondly, it's also about who you hunt. If you want to prevent ransomware, you should remember that the actual ransomware is just the last stage in the chain. It's just the way attackers are monetizing the access that someone already has to your network. It can be monetized in a lot of different ways. It can be monetized by stealing PII and then doing something with that. It can be monetized if you're a retail organization by installing skimming malware on your point of sale systems and a bunch of other monetization methods. What we would talk about doing is trying to hunt not the person at the end, not the person that specializes in ransomware, but hunting the person that specializes in gaining credentials, gaining network access, because their use case would be more generic, and they are also the thing that happens earlier in the chain. So I'm already 2 minutes past my time. So a final note, as you can probably assume, we here at KELA are pretty good at that. We provide solutions and services and products that do exactly that, give you visibility into what happens in the cybercrime underground and how you can protect yourself in a way that's better using our technologies. And with that final note, I'll shut up for a second and ask if anyone has any questions. Okay, so one thing that I'm getting is a question about how effectively our solutions help to protect against ransomware attacks. So I think that probably or hopefully it shines through what I've mentioned before. Ransomware is not just the ransomware at the end, it's all of the process that happens before, all of these intertwined, interconnected actions of malware infections and potential vulnerabilities that attackers monetize, and then the access being sold, and so on. Where we come into play, again, something very specific, is we give organizations access to really all of that, the things that happen in the back end, the markets, the credentials that are being monetized, the discussions the threat actors have about their TTPs. We also give you strategic intelligence about which attacks and which network intrusions we have seen and how you can defend yourself from them in a way that's better. So we really try to cover all of the use cases of cyber threat intelligence from strategic to tactical. And in that sense, I'll also refer everyone to scan this QR code so you can participate in a free trial of our products, and really relate maybe to the question before. I'm seeing another question here is, okay, so how does the trial could actually help it, what it could be, what people could do with it. So yeah, again, really get access to the data that we have, gain access to the threat landscape product that we offer that really shows you what's happening out there in the world, strategic intelligence, latest attacks, and so on. It can also be used to track down specific credentials and exposures that your organization might have suffered, and basically a bunch more stuff. Probably the best way to know is by really going into the free trial and looking what we offer. So to the people who are still here, another question: how to differentiate ransomware and Trojan behaviors? So that's like a very good question, and I think that it's not necessarily about differentiating these behaviors. It's about that one behavior can lead to the other. It's about that a Trojan infection or a malware infection in general, probably, or a lot of times, again, not 100% of the times, other monetization methods do exist, but a Trojan infection could lead indeed to a ransomware attack at the end of the day. Another question is, do we have trials for individuals? I see that Efrat is typing, so I'll let her take that. If anyone has any further questions, for those of you who have not been outscheduled by the fact that I took too long to go through the presentation, you are more than welcome to ask them in the few minutes that we have left. And if not, thank you very much. Good morning for those of you who are in the States, and good evening for those of you who are not. And thank you very much for attending.